Hello, welcome, happy Wednesday. You are on the Heart of Success show, and I'm your host, Larisa Vakulina. I go live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. South Australian time, and on this show, I talk about success in all areas of our life, not only in creating wealth, but also how can we be successful in health, in our relationship, and all other pursuits of our life. Today show is a 25th show, and it is super special. I'm so excited to have a very special guest with me today, Andrew Vakulin, Dr. Andrew Vakulin. It is super special because there's two reasons it is super special for me, is that Andrew is my son, and also he is a leading scientist and dedicated person to explore and discover everything about sleep health. So I welcome Andrew, and I would like to really just introduce Andrew and his achievements and appointments with his current career. So when I read his CV of 21 pages, I cannot really hide my inspiration and also admiration to a dedication and passion that he is putting in his work. So Andrew is a NHMRC Career Development Fellow, Associate Professor, Flinders Health and Medical Research, Sleep Health. He's Honorary Associate Woolcock Institute of Medical Research, University of Sydney. And there's a lot of different appointments, and also there's a multi-award list of Andrew achieved starting from 2006 and almost every year, and the latest award being in 2019. I just would like to say thank you to Andrew for accepting my invitation to be a special guest on my show today, and give us some value in what you're doing in the science of the sleep health. Oh my God, a lot of people don't really pay attention to this area of our life. I was myself in that state when I had my business and established my business back in 2000. I had a number of years that I had a sleep problem. And right now I know how important it is, and how the science is now putting everything to actually resolve the mystery of sleep, right? So, and you are the leading scientist, and I invited you to provide some insights and tips and recommendations to our listeners so that we can help others to look at this area with more seriousness and with more inspiration to look at that areas in a way that they can help to improve overall health. So the first question I would like to ask you is, what actually made you to choose this path? It's like, for me, it's interesting because I tend to think maybe my problem back then in sleep was kind of a motivator for you to become and explore in this area.
Oh, thanks, Larisa. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here and speak to you and everyone else. Look, I guess, a little bit about myself. I've done a Bachelor of Science at Adelaide University, sort of 2001 through to 2004, and it's during that period there wasn't really a lot of content on sleep or sleep health or physiology. So my focus was on physiology, and there was only a small amount of content. But it sort of tweaked my interest at that time, simply because it was a quite novel and unexplored field, and it was of interest compared to being in a laboratory environment where you dealing with microbes or viruses, or in sort of molecular field. I felt I wanted to explore this particular aspect of human physiology. Sleep obviously is an integral part of all living things, and we spend 1/3 of our life sleeping, and so it's ought to have very important implications for all daytime functions and activities. So I chose to do an honours degree at first, which was a 1-year small research project, and that really focused on looking at how sleep deprivation or a sleep restriction, which is quite common, as well as alcohol, impacted performance on driving ability in particular. So my focus is looking at operational performance. So these are things like driving a vehicle, so truck drivers, taxi drivers, operating any type of equipment where prolonged and monotonous operation could lead to fatigue. And so driver fatigue is one of my key focus areas. So that was a interesting project, and it really, cemented my my interest in the area. And I decided, well, I want to do a PhD now, but I moved a bit more into the clinical space, where I started looking at sleep disorders and people with sleep disorders, trying to better explore and better define which individual patients with sleep disorders are at increased risk of cognitive and mental outcomes during the day. And that's what I've done for my PhD over 3 to 4 years, which was, a great project to be part of. It's a multidisciplinary project with multiple investigators. So I got exposed to the clinical environment and learned a lot of new skills. That led me to a short stint in France, where, again, it was part of an award that I applied for and luckily successfully got, which funded my travel to France. And I spent 3 months in a laboratory there that specializes in driving performance, sleep deprivation, and fatigue research. So that, again, just gave me that extra bit of skills working in a different environment, in a different team, acquiring specialized skills and expertise, which I could bring back to Australia. I then proceeded on, completed my PhD, and then started what we call a postdoctoral period, which is sort of a 1 to 5 period of time, where a sort of early career researchers is probably the toughest period of the career, because they're just starting out. They don't have a big track record, and it's quite a competitive environment for them to get any research funding and to get themselves established. And so I
would like to kind of stop here and really take you to explain to us that alongside with your scientific skills, as I understand, you also need to have this kind of management and a leadership role, and also to understand the basics of the business, like financial viability of your research and things like that. So this is, how did you get into the understanding of these parts of your involvement?
Yeah, look, it's different for different individuals. Some researchers want to be in the lab. They want to actually collect and do the experiments themselves. And so they do that very successfully because they don't feel comfortable doing the leadership aspects of the research and the financial sort of oversight of the research programs. I felt, majority of researchers, if they want to be competitive in getting research funding, they need to aspire to be research leaders. And research leaders is to grow and supervise PhD students and honor students, and really grow their group and lead the group to perform important research that asks and answers important clinical questions. So I was lucky to be surrounded by great mentors. They were all great leaders, and that's how it's a natural path that I took. I also felt very comfortable with finance and management, and I spent time while being an active academic. I was a research manager of our entire group, which exposed me again to all the different elements of the administrative elements and the people management elements, and that, I got that experience again, I'm a lot more focused on research now, but I got those skills which I'm grateful for.
Absolutely. Like, it's like a kind of more of a leadership role of also assisting and lifting people up with their own, scientific ideas and academia and things like that. It's like I can relate to that as I was myself involved in a very challenging business. So I understand how challenging it is to be a scientist and also have all this the business kind of concepts and things like that. So right now I would like to move into the the question is like, what sleep health and disorders, what is this really mean? Like I think that we all at some stages of our lives have some problems with sleep, but we don't really know how to assess is this is just a temporarily kind of disbalance, or it is some kind of beginning of disorder.
Yeah, look, sleep generally, I think still in a society and a community is probably a little bit ignored, and other things take priority. Obviously, I'm a bit biased, but in our area, we think that sleep should be a pillar of health, like healthy diet and exercise. So those are all critical things that people accept and understand they're important, but sleep is often neglected because other things take over. Busy lifestyles,
Absolutely.
families, lots of things. But for us, it's not just getting enough sleep, but there's actually a lot of sleep disorders, and they're very, very common. So some of the most common ones are obstructive sleep apnea and insomnia. And generally, even if you don't have a clinical sleep disorder, sleep complaints, at least at some point, affects 4 in 10 adults in Australia. And so if you're looking at middle-aged population, for example, middle-aged men, above 25%, so that's 1 in 4 men, will have some level of obstructive sleep apnea and or snoring. Whether or not that impacts their daytime function is a sort of different question, but there is certainly a lot of sleep complaints, sleep problems, and general not sufficient sleep that's out there in the community. And so really we're trying to increase the awareness, increase the education, and also train the clinical workforce, particularly at the primary care level, so the GPs can better recognize it and have the right tools to help people. Because at the moment, it's really a specialized field where if you have a problem, you need to see a specialist, but there's just simply not enough specialists out there to cater for such a large amount of complaints, particularly now in times of coronavirus. In the last 18 months, been causing a lot of people stress and issues with sleep.
Yes, and I read from your briefings here that you are also for some time now focusing on biomaker discovery to develop innovative ways to assess fitness to drive or work in patients with sleep disorders. So this is something that you leading into some kind of a new marker to actually assist the GPs, doctors, to use in finding or diagnosing.
Assess the GPs, assessment for special. I guess the issue with sleep disorders or even insufficient sleep, and it's something, a core area of my research, is that it's not black and white like other conditions. It's not like diabetes or heart disease or other things, which are all comorbid with sleep problems and related to sleep problems. It's a lot more blurry in terms of where things become a negative impact on health versus not. So what I mean by that is that even in healthy young people without any problems, some of them can lose a little bit of sleep and be very sleepy and very impaired, and others could go for 3 days without sleep, and at least objectively measured in the way we do, can be relatively unimpaired and do not report. So that's, 2-3 days of without sleep is quite a long time, but it's a distribution. So it means there's some people at the extreme at one end and some people at the extreme on the other end. And what we know now is that it's likely a genetic basis for this, which means you're born with your capacity to withstand sleep loss. And therefore we can find biomarkers. So these are biomarkers. What we mean by that is anything that we can measure, whether biological or physiological or behavioral, that would tell us about whether or not someone is susceptible to sleep loss or insufficient sleep. All of that translates to sleep disorders, because clearly somebody could have a sleep disorder that we would measure and diagnose, but whether that person actually has impairment in terms of cognitive function, mental health, or driving performance is uncertain. And that's a clinical challenge, and that's what my work is trying to solve or provide tools for, is that every person that sees a sleep specialist will be considered as to whether or not they may be at risk of driver fatigue or excessive sleepiness. And the tools that we have are okay, but they're just not good enough to really have a personalized approach where we can really cater to identifying individuals at risk, and likewise those individuals that are not at risk, and really tailor the sleep treatments and therapies towards those individuals to help them feel better.
How interesting, right? It's all really not really clear cut about how to apply it in NMS treatment. So yes, it is very mystical kind of area in our lives, right? Especially when we talk about dreaming and things like that. But I don't think I go today about talking about it. And I would like to ask you, what impact of sleep disorders have on cognitive functions?
Yeah, so again, variable, but as a group, on average, people with sleep disorders, and it depends on which sleep disorder. So take obstructive sleep apnea, for example, because there's obstructive sleep apnea is a condition where the airway relaxes during sleep and repeatedly either narrows or collapses completely, which means the person oxygen levels in their blood become reduced, and that wakes the brain up momentarily to then start breathing again. So the airway opens up. So that's the condition. That's a physiological, obviously, condition of the upper airway, and it repeatedly happens throughout the night, up to hundreds of times a night. And when that happens, clearly there's a stress on the body, but there's also stress on the function of sleep in terms of being constantly, repeatedly interrupted. And so all of that impacts the brain, both from a fragmented sleep, but also the oxygen, the low oxygen levels deprive the brain repeatedly of oxygen, and all of that leads to consequences during the day. And that things like memory, so short-term working memory, trying to do tasks that require you to remember things as you're doing it to have high performance, that's all impacted. Particularly vigilance and attention. So vigilance are these things where you have to maintain your attention on a particular task. It could be a very simple task. In fact, the simpler it is, the more likely you are to, struggle to maintain concentration for a long time. And that's where the driving comes in. The long distance driving, monotonous driving, you're driving, and it's a fairly automated task, but therefore it's also monotonous. It can become boring, and maintaining vigilant attention so you avoid these micro sleeps, the small fall asleep episodes. That's all comes out in a group. But again, as I mentioned before, it's this variation and there's a blurry line between somebody who would be impacted and others not. So that's what we're really trying to standardize and identify people that are impacted by this and have a risk. We're trying to really identify them and help them as best we can with the therapies, but also not penalize unnecessarily people that are not impacted, even though they stop breathing 500 times a night. So it's complicated, but it's a lot of medical fields are going towards this personalized approach. It's not good enough to have a blanket rule one size fits all approach to managing a lot of these conditions, particularly things like sleep health, which, as I mentioned, is quite variable between people.
Right. Would you be able to list maybe what sleep disorders are? Like you just have taken us through the example of the sleep apnea, which is quite common in our society. But is there any other disorders, like in terms of not having the sleep apnea, but still having some difficulty to go to bed and sleep in time, and have limited time sleeping or loss in sleep, and how this is affecting the performance?
Yeah. Look, insomnia is probably one of the most common. It's probably more common, if as common, or if not more common, than obstructive sleep apnea. So insomnia is really the definition for insomnia is essentially an inability to fall asleep, stay asleep, or wake up too early. And so that's more of a, I guess, a problem with, it's not a physiological problem. So there's typically most people with insomnia, it's a transient occurrence. It may be triggered by something, an event, or something that's happening in someone's life, and then most people experience sometimes, some nights they just can't fall asleep. But it's really, if it becomes what we would define as chronic, and so symptoms of insomnia, inability to fall asleep or stay asleep or wake up too early, and just not being satisfied with sleep for 3 months or more, would be considered something that's becoming a chronic. And so that becomes more of a cognitive aspect to it, where people essentially become accustomed to the fact that they're not falling asleep, and they're starting to worry, and they're starting to stress, and they're starting to think a lot more when they're lying down, instead of calming and drifting off to sleep. The more that they are not falling asleep, the more stressed and the more anxious about sleep they become, and so it sort of becomes this self-perpetual loop that continues. And if that can't be broken, that's where people usually seek help. Of course,
Yes.
sleeping pills and sedative hypnotics is one of the most common things that would be prescribed, but it's certainly not recommended or supported therapy from a sleep specialist, sleep health perspective, at least in the long term. Sleeping pills is a band-aid solutions that help you sleep at that point in time, or maybe for a little while, but they're not fixing the issue I described, this sort of perpetual stress and worry and anxiety about sleep. So for that, the therapy is a cognitive behavioral therapy, as we term it, which is really a sort of a coaching training technique by a specialist psychologist, sleep psychologist, where they essentially coach and train the person to recognize that they're sleeping, and really using their bed and the bedroom environment for sleep. Because one of the main issues with insomnia is that the actual physiological sleep is usually perfect. It's really the perception of that individual that's experiencing the problem. It's their perceived lack of sleep that's the problem. So if you actually measure their sleep, they're sleeping perfectly fine and sufficiently. But obviously there's different types.
Absolutely. I believe that when I was experiencing problem in sleep, that's probably what it was, because it was more of an emotional overwhelm or emotional excitement that was keeping me worrying about that I'm not sleeping. And actually, even thinking about that, I was not sleeping. Possibly I was sleeping some period of time, but because of perceiving myself not sleeping, I think that's really was very stressful, and I felt like I was not rested. I felt like I'm tired. I felt like I'm collapsing from not sleeping through the night. But when you scientists telling us that we sleep, but we just thinking that we don't. So I don't know how that's that. But I actually fixed it with some holistic approach. But interesting to hear what you scientists think about it.
Oh, look, there's multiple different therapies coming out for insomnia, but they're all grounded in the same sort of element. Essentially, it's a lot of the people that experience insomnia and they feel like they're not getting enough sleep. I guess before I got into that, the interesting thing with a lot of insomnia, at least with certain types, is that there isn't this immediate impact on their performance. So the insomnia, people with insomnia or co-experiencing don't report feeling excessively sleepy. They feel they usually more so report being tired and fatigued, which is different to being sleepy. And so it's almost what we call an element of hyperarousal. So people are anxious and hyper aroused both during the day and during the night. And so we don't see these overt, micro sleep events, people falling asleep, which is typical of a lot of sleep apnea patients, where they are feeling excessively sleepy. They can fall asleep and doze off while watching telly or whatever. So it's a different symptoms. But the symptoms during the day is more this fatigue, stress, and there's an impact on mental health from that, but it's not overt impaired performance. So for insomnia, the treatments are at least the gold standard treatments that we believe most effective are these behavioral-based, cognitive and behavioral-based therapies. And they're not, they're moving into more newer approaches using digital technologies. So you don't necessarily have to see a human psychologist. There are apps and programs that are evidence-based and done a lot of testing on that can work for some people. And there's certainly new technologies in terms of using light as well as melatonin, which is a natural hormone linked to sleep. And even newer technology that we're testing now that's not available, but it's sort of a very rapid cognitive behavioral therapy, because usually this therapy takes 4 to 6 weeks with weekly sessions. You need to complete certain stages, but there is what we're exploring with a small device and a technique to really squash that sleep retraining period to sort of a weekend period. So there's new things on the horizon, but they're all essentially based on the same thing. You need to retrain and recoach the brain and the body, the mind of the person experiencing that, how to go about it, keeping a good sleep hygiene, good routine, and there's an element of consolidating your sleep in a particular period. So people just coach you through it. The specialists coach you through that period, and after people complete it, they really just get back to sort of realizing. And important things, it's not not being too worried and not feeling that it's this dramatic thing if you don't get sleep and you can't sleep. A lot of people feel that it's worse than it actually is, and that they're really not getting sleep. But I think a bit of reassurance and this therapy together just teaches people it's okay. It's okay not to get sleep sometimes, but it's important to work through it to get back to an element. I mean, there are important sleep hygiene principles that are we call it sleep hygiene, which is basically just good habits and behaviors around the sleep period.
Yeah, we're going to get to at the end of our show, like maybe there would be, some sort of tips and recommendations that you quickly can give people so that they can implement tonight, right? So, but I think the next question I would like to ask you is what impact of sleep disorders on mental health? Well, this is kind of another area. A little bit all connected, but still it is a little bit of a different conversation.
What we know, growing evidence is that this bidirectional relationship between sleep and mental health. So anxiety, depression, and a lot of these common problems, particularly in younger people, that are, especially in current COVID times, there would be a lot of people that would have increased stresses, but generally those things are always linked to a sleep complaint as they progress. So it's either the mental health aspects themselves trigger an issue with sleeping, or sleeping problems can often trigger the mental health and anxiety and depression sort of symptomatology. And really, it's not there isn't a causative element because one can drive the other and it becomes a cycle. But what we do know is that they become standalone problems. So if you having mental health problems and also experiencing sleep issues, both needs to be attended to. And if you can attend to a sleep problem, we find at least growing evidence suggested that you will reduce the symptoms of mental health problem or even completely reduce it to a level that's normal. So I guess the issue now that we're trying to research further and provide sort of evidence for is that when somebody is going to their general practitioner with a complaint of mental health problems and they report sleep problems, those two need to be treated and taken seriously, because at the moment, I guess one of the issues that a lot of GPs would take sleep complaints as a symptom or something that just happens as a result of the mental health problem, and if they treat that mental health problem with a antidepressant or some other medication, that sleep problem will go away. But what we find is that no, the sleep problem establishes as its own standalone insomnia sleep issue, and then often treating the depression or anxiety, for example, doesn't alleviate those problems, because as I said before, you can have it for a while, and once it goes on, it sort of cements itself and becomes hard to get out.
Right. It's like we start to get understanding that everything is interrelated and everything is like kind of two-way. And if we have these mental health issues and sleep issues, it's like it needs to be attended in both from both sides, right? So
absolutely. I mean, I know I'm focusing on cognitive mental health sort of daytime outcomes, but sleep, as I mentioned, we believe it must be a pillar of health that everyone needs to sort of recognize and take seriously, or at least not intentionally neglect it or put it on the backside. It's really, if you're losing your sleep, it impacts every single cell in your body and every single function in your body. So there's, in terms of insulin control, hypertension, diabetes, and all the other cardiometabolic functions and diseases that we know of and do take seriously, they're all related. So if you have acute sleep deprivation or a period of sustained reduced amount of sleep, your insulin control is often at a pre-diabetic level. So basically all the different functions in your body that are related to diabetes and hypertension are exhibited in somebody who's sleep deprived, either acutely or have a sustained period of reduced amount of sleep. So it's really it's one of those things that where you essentially are impacted on all levels, and it's more acute is okay because it goes away, but it's the sustained, and our society as a whole are generally sleep deprived, and we're getting less sleep in sort of more modern society versus what we did in the past, a little bit less. And it's driven by a lot of factors, including artificial light that we have all over.
That's it. Yes, we come to these questions now where I really would like you to elaborate on just everyday life and how people can help themselves to have that sleep hygiene, as you said, or sleep discipline, and all of these little tips that can help people on everyday life just to adjust or to change a little bit, so that can help everyday people just to improve their sleep health.
Yep. Yeah, look, having a stable routine is one of the most important things. So it's working out, trying to go to bed when you actually feel tired, going to bed when you feel like you're ready for sleep, and trying to maintain a consistent bedtime and wake time every day, including the weekends. I know sometimes it's harder, but one of the telltale signs that you're not getting sufficient sleep is that if you tend to sleep in on the weekend. So if you're asked, if you're given an opportunity and you didn't have to get up the next morning and do something, if you were sleeping in longer for 1 to 2 hours, that essentially means that you're building up sleep pressure, or what we call sleep debt, during the week. It means you're having consistently less sleep during the weekdays, and then you, given the opportunity, either weekend or holiday, you sleep in, because your body will naturally want to catch up. It's a homeostasis. Body will want to catch up. So you want to keep constant routine, but then there's a lot of elements around the behavior around sleep times. So trying to, obviously not drink caffeine. Caffeine is a stimulant. You don't want to drink caffeine and it has a relatively long half-life, sort of 6 hours. So if you go on a bed, 10 o'clock, you don't want to be having coffee after 3 or 4 p.m. You certainly don't want to have a coffee after your dinner. Alcohol, you don't want to be drinking alcohol close to bedtime. Watching bright light, you don't want to be exposing yourself. You want to have environment in a few hours leading to sleep where you have dim light, and certainly not blast all the lights in your house. You want to be, preparing yourself mentally and physically for that sleep period. So trying to do something calm, not doing your emails right up until the last moment, not trying to do work. And a lot of the time using the bed, the rule of thumb is the bed is pretty, it's used for intimacy and for sleep. They're the only two things that you should be in bed for.
Listen, guys, this is the science saying, and a lot of people just overwork and use the time to preparing yourself for rest and really taking it seriously. We keep doing it last minute, checking emails and doing all sorts of things, and a lot of people having TV in their bedrooms.
Correct. And that's the sign. One of the main treatment insomnia therapies that you try to go through and you eliminate all those behaviors, because if you're spending an hour and a half lying in bed doing something else apart from trying to sleep, you're essentially spending a lot more time in bed versus sleeping, and that then turns to a perception then that you're actually trying to go to sleep, or you're trying to be in bed for a long time. And people with insomnia, when they feel they're not getting enough sleep, they're actually trying to go to bed earlier than they would normally, because they want to get to sleep earlier, or they might think that it's going to take them longer, so they'll allow more time. That's counterproductive, because that essentially they're not naturally going to go to sleep earlier, because the body has its own. Everyone has their circadian time internal. We have an internal clock in our brains that will dictate the cycles of sleep and wakefulness. Some people need to go to sleep much later. Some people go to sleep earlier. Most people are sort of in the middle, and you need to listen to that. And so it's actually going to bed around the time you really feel tired and sleepy. Obviously, reading and all of those relaxation things are good, but even then you want to avoid fully lying down in bed doing it. You want to be upright. You want to be in a situation where you're not associating bed with activities other than sleep.
Absolutely. I know now, looking back at why I was not sleeping, I used to love reading books, like laying in bed with a pillow a little up. And that's what really probably contributed in my problem. Personally, now I know I get rid of this habit completely, although I like to read, but now I'm reading in the daytime, not at the time of going to bed. So and also a few tips, like we've been talking about one or two, like we talk about busy people now, like everyone is so busy, especially business owners and entrepreneurs. They using every half an hour of their lives to be productive and get the value to clients and things like that. How can they look seriously at this area of their health, and how can we make their lives easier to have a little very quick fixes and tips to recommend to them?
Look, it's tricky. Everyone's busy, and business people, of course, are very busy, and there's different constantly changing environment with stressful times and stressful situation where sleep will be messed up. I guess it's a conscious choice that people need to make, that this is important, especially if they do feel some of the daytime symptoms of tiredness and fatigue and stress and emotion. Emotional regulation is very much linked to sleep and impacted by sleep. And so, it's just taking those steps, like with everything else. If you protect your time for exercise and you protect your time to do certain things, you just need to have that protected time to sleep. And, I was going to say technology is a big issue. We all have our phones and we're looking at the phones, and we found, you'll have 30% of people or more, I forget the exact numbers from our surveys, that will check their phone on average, 2 to 3 times during the night. So this is not just before bed and then waking up. Literally, people, if they wake up for whatever reason, they reach for the phone. So that's just phenomenal. And you want to just either switch it off or get rid of it so you can't get to it. So it's not, if you wake up for a little bit, which most of us wake up multiple times a night just for a short period, that doesn't end up into a full-blown reach for the phone and start checking emails. So it's hard, but it's a conscious choice that people need to make.
Absolutely. That's what we're talking. We're talking about to become conscious people, like waking up and become consciously choosing our day hours and our sleep hours, and have these healthy boundaries of what we're really doing when we go to bed and what we doing in the daytime. So basically, would like to go now to the comments here and just have a few people here that's saying hello, and basically I'm really glad people joining us and listening. It is very important. This is the question: how is sleep apnea brought about?
Look, a great question. And look, there are particular key risk factors for obstructive sleep apnea. So it can happen in childhood, so adolescent children, particularly under the age of 5, can have snoring and obstructive sleep apnea. So there's a whole field of pediatric sleep medicine.
Right.
But in children, the cause of sleep apnea is usually enlarged tonsils and adenoids. So this is really and that's common in children, and it can narrow their way to their airway to the point where it's harder for them to breathe. They snore, and they can have this apneas where the airway collapses completely, and that can impact their learning, their emotional regulation, their behavior. So that's all been linked, but that's fixed with ENT surgery, where the standard surgery for removing the adenoids and or tonsils. For adults, it's very tightly linked. So the main drivers there, the main risk factors are weight, so being overweight or obese. So BMI, your body mass index, how much weight someone is carrying, particularly around the neck, it has a big impact on how much sleep apnea you might have. Gender is also a risk factor. So males are 2 to 3 times more likely to have obstructive sleep apnea. It's more prevalent in men, particularly middle-aged men, but women certainly do have it, and particularly postmenopausal women will have it. And the symptoms of sleep apnea in terms of outcomes and health outcomes we're also finding that are different. Different health outcomes tend to be coming out in women compared to men, and we're doing research again to try to highlight that, because women are a little bit more less represented and more neglected in terms of clinical care, and GPs picking that up as a problem. And I guess just to add to that a little bit is that on the other level, there are different, what we call phenotypes, or different characteristics of people of why they actually get their sleep apnea as well. So as I said, obesity is one, but then there are the muscle function in the airway. So it could be the reduced muscle function that makes the airway floppy, or it could be the anatomy. So just the way the jaw, the nose, and the anatomy of the skull is arranged can cause a narrowing of the airway. And then there are other sort of reflex type chemoreceptors, we call them, and how they function in terms of the whole respiratory control system during sleep can be compromised and increased. So all of those factors correlate to one another and contribute to various degrees to whether somebody has very severe sleep apnea versus somebody who has mild sleep apnea.
Right. Yeah. It seems like it seems to be so frequent nowadays. Is that because we need to investigate these areas and the science needs to pay attention? I don't know if like maybe 25 or 30 years ago, like people snoring, oh, bad luck, you're snoring, and it only was not comfortable for the wife or the wife snoring for the husband. But now it seems like we're paying more attention to these things.
Yeah, of course. I mean, sleep medicine as a field is quite young. It's only, sort of 60 years old, and they started in their 60s recording brainwave activity during sleep, and then started recording respiration. But yeah, it's certainly more recognized clinically, but in the community, I think there is more recognition, because certainly in the past it was, snoring is just, that a lot of people snore, and it's true, most people will snore at some points or another, depending on which positions they sleep, or whether they had a few red wines before they went to sleep. It makes their airway more collapsible. But I guess there's still this misperception about what impact it might have. And also, I guess at least a number of years ago, when I would speak to people about it, they would say, "Oh, I have no problem sleeping. I could sleep anywhere, anytime." So that's actually the problem, because you shouldn't be able to sleep anytime, anywhere, because that really just indicates that the brain is excessively sleepy, which means you will have excessive daytime sleepiness, and it's probably likely you have some obstructive sleep apnea. So a healthy human being shouldn't go lie down at 10 a.m. in the morning after they've been awake for a couple of hours and easily fall asleep. And we do there's a range of clinical daytime tests, we call them, where we measure that. We measure, repeatedly putting somebody into a chair or into a bed and asking them to either stay awake or fall asleep. And if they do that very quickly and easily all through the day, that's a sign of an issue. You shouldn't be able to fall asleep easily. There's only certain periods during the day where it's more likely that you fall asleep.
Right. Yes. So very interesting. Like, let's go and see this a few 25th show. Congratulations. Tracy is here. Thank you so much. Sleep is so important to your general health and well-being. Yes, we've been covering that. Someone needs to watch replay. There's another question. What is the daily recommended number of sleep hours?
Great question. And look, there's been a lot of work in this, and it's a what we call a bell-shaped distribution. So predominantly, and it changes throughout life, it's been mapped out all the way from infants to older adults. And in people over the age of 18, the recommended hours of sleep per night is 7 to 8 hours. So if you can hit that, if you sleep 7.5, 8 hours, great. And that's sort of the majority of the population. That's the sleep need. But there's, as I said, there's a distribution. So 10 to 20% of individuals might require a little bit more. So maybe 8 to 9 hours, and some 10 to 20% of the individuals might require a little bit less, so 6 to 7. They can get away with that. So it's really trying to listen to your body and, trying to be in tune of how much. If you're feeling tired, if you're feeling sleepy, if you're feeling run down, and you feel that you're not getting enough sleep, it's very likely that you're not getting enough sleep. So it's really, some people, if they function perfectly fine with 6 hours of sleep, that's great. It's really, if you feel that there's a problem, then there probably is. And if you're completely happy with your alertness levels and your productivity and your mental health, you're probably sleeping perfectly well.
Right. Yes. Well, thank you so much for such a detailed explanation and just introducing us to what the scientific field about sleep health is doing. And there's so many interesting innovations. And also would like to just ask you and to mention that a couple of years ago, I think only, or maybe even less, that in Adelaide there was a new facility, a new piece of art sleep laboratory was opened, and I was lucky to be able to go and see this facility, and it's really, really impressive. So, what this facility about, and how, what research is, or whatever is, what do you do in there, really?
Oh, look, we're doing pretty much all things to do with sleep health research. So, yeah, we have a 6-bedroom sleep laboratory here built at Flinders University at Bedford Park campus. So it's been around for a couple of years now, but it's really when we shifted from the old repatriation general hospital, we were fortunate that the university, Flinders University, invested into this facility, and we're doing research across the board in terms of sleep disorders, so sleep apnea, insomnia, and other more rare sleep conditions. But we're also looking at, more mechanistic studies, so the sleep deprivation, which is a lot of the stuff that I do. We're looking at the impacts of shift work and operational performance. So large amount of our workforce in the community is working all sorts of hours, and that has a big impact on sleep and sleep disorders and circadian disorders. And so we're doing a lot of work in that field. We are doing work in sleep physiology, so looking at the very detailed upper airway physiology, as well as various other experimental and a lot of clinical trials. So we're doing a lot of interventions to try to treat sleep disorders, and also, I guess, a lot of new technologies, because there's a lot of new technologies out there that claim to measure or do measure sleep in some way, and it's a little bit hard to know which ones to trust and which ones to your Fitbits and your Apple Watches and all of those devices. So we are doing a lot more work in that area, because we will be living with this technology. It's not going away, and we need to work, researchers and clinicians in the sleep area will working more and more closely to make sure that what we get is robust and scientific, has an evidence-based, and can be used to guide health in a more holistic individual's approach. So I think sleep health, like many other fields, are moving towards this personalized approach, as I mentioned, and that means ongoing monitoring of health and sleep in order to provide the best feedback and advice about how to maintain healthy sleep and general lifestyle.
Right, yes. And you also regularly inviting volunteers to the facility so that you do some experiments and things. And so this is ongoing. And how many times a year do you do that and invite? And maybe someone from who listens would be interested to to become a volunteer.
Look, we're always looking for volunteers, and not only volunteers that have a particular sleep complaint or sleep problem. We very often require volunteers that are just interested and they're healthy, and we always need healthy volunteers so we can run experiments and compare different groups with healthy groups, and also how the interventions work in a sleep disordered versus non-sleep disorder. So always very grateful for people's time. I mean, volunteering through our centre is very easy. So if you literally Google Adelaide Institute for Sleep Health, that should be the first or second thing that'll pop up, Flinders University, or you can Google my name. Once you get to the Flinders University site, you'll be able to see the volunteer link or a tab there. And the way we do it here is we have developed a simple survey that essentially online you would register your interest, and they would ask you several questions, and you would go into our registry or database of people interested in giving their time for research. And that's the best way to get in, because then we would essentially find you when we're running different projects that are you might be eligible for. We would reach out and ask you if you're interested in participating.
Wow, thank you so much. See, guys, if you want to help into research of our most mysterious part of ourselves, the sleep area, so you can volunteer and get involved in that and contribute. So I would like to thank you again, Andrew, for accepting my invitation and jump here with me to explain in such a beautiful, detailed way of the sleep health and disorders and what science is doing. And I would like to thank you all our listeners who are with us here. There's a few people, talking. So I would really like to say thank you, and I maybe check up with you again next year and see where your research is taking you, and is there any breakthroughs, scientific discoveries and things like that. And thank you so much. And I will come back again live next week on Wednesday at 2 p.m. South Australian time. And I would like to put a music for you to just to brighten up a little bit of your life. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.